Welcome, everyone. This is the Humanities Elevator Pitch first session of the 7th Polygen Symposium of Rising Scholars. My name is Isabella, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. The goal of our symposium is just to celebrate and showcase all the hard work of our Polygen scholars. Everyone has worked really hard on their projects over the past couple of months. We have a big session today. We have 7 students presenting on a variety of different topics. And then a fellow member of the Polygens team is going to be scoring each student's presentation, which will help us determine prize winners after the event. For attendees, if you have any questions, please type your questions in the Q&A for each speaker, and then we'll have time at the end of the session for speakers to answer your questions. Okay, so we are going to start with Dagna. So if you want to go ahead and share your slides, and I'll try and spotlight you.
Okay, let me know when I can start.
Yeah, it looks good to me. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. My name is Dagna, and I'm from Poland. As you all probably already know, approximately 6 months ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, causing millions of people to have to evacuate their homes. As a Polish person, I felt that there was a certain sense of responsibility to understand the issue more clearly, which is why I decided to research how Ukrainian refugee immigration patterns may be affected by cultural similarities. The cultural similarities that I researched specifically were language, familial ties, and religion. The results from this were later translated into policy recommendations that the Polish government could potentially implement. My research was based on 3 interviews and a survey which focused on the 3 sections that I mentioned, and it also took into account people's demographics. The results from the survey showed that there was correlation between language and familial ties and the duration of stay. When I say duration of stay, it's just another way of saying immigration patterns. But the same could actually not be said for religion. But what the survey couldn't show, the interviews did, which was that younger refugees did often feel that religion did bring them a certain sense of comfort, which could ultimately affect one's decision to stay in a given country. This later led me to my policy recommendations. In my research paper, I explain in depth why the Polish government does want to support Ukrainian refugees, but because of the time constraint on this presentation, it just must be assumed that they do. Since there was correlation between familial ties and the duration of stay, the recommended policies are continuing 500 plus, which is a monthly payment for parents with children, and implementing long-term incentive plans. As for language, it would be beneficial to teach Polish as a second language in schools. And finally, for religion, the policy recommendation is to build more Orthodox churches to meet the rise in demand. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and please don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
If folks have questions, if they want to, they can unmute and ask them directly, or they can post them in the chat and I can read them in the Q&A section. And I also have a question just to get started. I know you mentioned that you were drawn to the topic as being Polish. What was the most interesting thing you discovered in your research, or something that surprised you?
Well, I talked to many of the refugees to get to know the subject more personally. And I think what surprised me most wasn't really to do with my topic, but it was how these people were dealing with the changes in their lives. They were so positive. They were so accepting. I think it was really inspirational talking to many of the refugees while I was doing this research project. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask the question directly if you want to unmute.
Okay, because your project seems to involve, interacting with the refugees directly. I was also wondering if there were any challenges in that, or just generally what you felt was the biggest challenge in your project.
So the biggest challenge was probably communication. I personally do not speak Russian or Ukrainian, so there was definitely a language barrier that had to be overcome. So I'd either speak in English if they felt more comfortable speaking English, or some of them did have a basic understanding of Polish. So the conversations did either happen in Polish or English. It just depended on the individual, but language was definitely the biggest barrier while doing this research project, especially with the survey too. A lot of the responses were in Russian. I don't speak Russian, so it was hard, but I learned a lot from it. Yeah.
How did you go about translating the responses?
So a lot of it went to Google Translate, actually, but I also have a friend who speaks Russian and helped me a bit that way. So it was a bit of both. I didn't want to have any mistakes with Google Translate, so I tried to be very careful with that.
Wow. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Otherwise, we can go ahead to the next scholar. Any other questions? Okay, awesome job, Dagna. Thank you so much for getting us started. I'm going to remove the spotlight. And next we have Chaitana. I think you're still muted. There you go.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Chetna. So my research project really centered around measuring political responsiveness to public opinion. So I'll just go into describing it. Democracy has long been established as a core foundation for American pride and as the system by which American values are portrayed. Democracy can be broken down into two Latin roots, demos referring to the people and kratos referring to power. Roughly translated, this means the power of the people, which was essentially our founding fathers' clear goal in initially establishing a representative government. However, a recently published Pew Research study measuring public trust in government since the 1960s actually found that faith in government within the past decade has been at record lows. So most recently, only 20% of Americans reported that they would trust the government to do what is right at least most of the time. So to put this into perspective, 75% of Americans reported the same in 1958, when the National Election Study first began this inquiry. So today's lack of faith only highlights that it is increasingly crucial to review and reflect on the process by which we do things. For this reason, my project attempts to take a closer look at our government system in order to clearly define the public's roles in American laws and to determine the extent of which a representative government is reflective of the people. So essentially, the project examines the responsiveness by government agencies to public advocacy. It starts by looking into results of public advocacy that have been seen in the past, such as increases in environmental protection policy, or even scaling back on the Vietnam War. So prior research establishes that within each of these issues, legislation follows increases in public activism. So in that way, government laws ended up reflecting public opinion. So when there was an increase in public advocacy for a certain cause, government policy tended to address it. However, the same cannot necessarily be said for that correlation today. As such, findings from the past in my study are compared with statistics on advocacy groups in specific areas today in order to determine what specifically, if anything, has even changed. So the project is presented in the format of like a before and after study using data from prior research in order to find the difference between interest groups' impacts historically and their impacts currently. So the project essentially highlights the relationship between government legislation and the wants of the public, ultimately examining the efficacy of a representative system in government by answering the question of whether or not the public's needs are truly really being served. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So same thing, if folks have questions, they're welcome to unmute or they also can put them in the Q&A session chat box. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the chat box.
Okay, I was wondering, because in the US there seems to be a lot of connection between public opinion and how it is shaped by journalism. So I'm just wondering if you found a very strong link, or if there was anything surprising about the link that you saw.
Yeah, so my research really just centered around public opinion and government, and as such, we've actually seen that recently there's been less of a connection. So yes, you're correct in saying that journalism had like a really great connection with public opinion, but overall that connection didn't really have that huge of an impact, because like the whole point also is that it's like, as the years are going by, it's having less of an impact as a whole on legislation, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I was curious what kind of like next steps, like what this project has like inspired for you, or if there's any like next steps of your project, or just kind of like your interests in this topic.
So in terms of next steps, really I want to like do more research on like potentially what could have caused this and like the contributing factors to legislation, because if public opinion is having less of an impact, then what might be having more of an impact as the years go by, one. And then two, my connection with the topic, it's actually really interesting because last year I was doing some research in class about the prison system and prison reform, and it came out that public opinion had like a huge impact on legislation as it related to prison reform. So that's why I started like really looking into public opinion's impacts on legislation today. And then as I did more research, I realized that that connection had actually been seen less and less from, let's say, a starting point as like the 60s.
That's super interesting. And do you have any, is there any like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I just had one more question, if I may. So what was your approach to assessing public opinion? Were they like government surveys, or like just your methodology of knowing what the public opinion was?
So that was actually like a huge issue for me in the beginning, because it was really hard to like narrow down what I would be like observable factors in terms of like finding these things. But first of all, I started out with prior research, because there had been historical research done about things like with environmental policy and all that. And then like all of these research studies showed that like an increase in population of public advocacy groups had that correlation with government. So then I started looking into specific case studies with public advocacy groups, larger public advocacy groups, and then like I narrowed it down to a smaller area as well. In terms of that as well, it was like a number of things. So it was general statistics about advocacy groups and like in general statistics, as well as case studies.
Awesome. I I think we have one hand raised. I just allowed you to talk. I didn't know that you guys weren't able to talk. Wong Buzz. You can go ahead and talk. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, well, maybe you can, if you want to post questions in the chat for specific, in the Q&A for specific panelists, if we have time at the end too, we can always come back, or the panelists can just answer them in writing. But I think we should probably move on. Thank you so much. I will unspotlight you. And then next we have Lillian.
Let me know when I can begin. Oh, I'll share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi, I'm Lillian, and today I'll be presenting to you on my research topic. So we've all bought something online, whether that be household items, clothes, or makeup. And as social media usage rises among younger generations, businesses have begun to utilize social media advertising as a way to directly connect their products to consumers. Now, millennials are the largest consumer group on social media, with 79% of the generation having purchased an item on social media in 2021, followed by 78% of Gen Z. Now, these consumers are concerned about sustainability. For example, 22% of millennials in a survey conducted by Statista considered sustainability when purchasing products, followed by 18% of Gen Z. Now, these purported green products delivered up to $118 billion in sales in 2018 alone. That's up 29% from 2013. Now, specifically in beauty and lifestyle, companies make efforts to display themselves as sustainable and environmentally friendly, because products marketed as sustainable grew 5.6 times faster than those that were not. However, how critical is sustainability to Gen Z and millennials? This question led me to conduct a survey analyzing the importance of sustainability among Gen Z and millennial women when purchasing products. My survey analyzed how a woman's views on sustainability are reflected in her purchasing behavior and whether advertising sustainability is an effective marketing tactic. I was able to gather sufficient evidence to conclude that the usage of marketing sustainability may only work in certain scenarios, and consumer behavior has other factors heavily driving a consumer's reason to purchase. A large factor is cost, along with brand perception or bias. Many times throughout the survey, respondents said they cared about sustainability in their purchasing decisions, but when presented with sustainable versus unsustainable products, majority of the respondents actually chose the unsustainable option, even when the sustainable product was cheaper. So this research, as you can imagine, was extremely eye-opening in my perception of what sustainability is and how much people truly do care about it. In future research, though, I believe it is important that a new survey includes an even higher diversification of respondents and that it covers different aspects of product marketing so it can assess the importance of sustainability compared to these other marketing tactics. So what does advertising sustainability do? Well, while millennial and Gen Z consumers care about sustainability, it's not a strong enough factor to impact their purchasing behavior on its own. You need to look at other factors such as celebrity endorsements, how they're seeing the ad, where they're hearing it from, things like that. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Lillian. Any questions for Lillian? And I didn't realize attendees cannot speak unless I give them permission to, so just raise your hand, or again, you can post it in the Q&A chat box. I was curious, like what kind of products, if you had an example or two of some kind of products that do this sustainability marketing.
Oh yeah, I could tell you a bunch. There's things like Casetify has their own, Casetify is a phone case brand. It has its own, like, I guess you could call it sustainable option, which is called RE Casetify. And they're actually, this was really interesting in the survey, they're the same price, but majority of respondents chose the Casetify brand over the recycled other Casetify brand. There's places like Everlane, which is a sustainable clothing brand. Ilia is a sustainable makeup brand. So it was mainly just like lifestyle products.
Okay, interesting. Any other questions for Lillian?
Yeah, I found your finding of hypocrisy within like the Gen Z community when choosing greenwashed products or not choosing them. So how do you think we can move forward and like overcome greenwashing and just also not being hypocritical like that? How do you think that can be moved forward? Because I mean, we all know climate emergency is here, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think kind of the most general answer to that is education on the issue. The reason why so many people kind of contradicted what they were saying earlier was because they just didn't have enough knowledge on certain brands. They didn't have enough knowledge on what sustainability and buying ethically really means. So I think that a lot of the issue is people just don't know. And I can speak from personal experience. Before this, I was aware of greenwashing, but I didn't realize how often it happened. I also, even though I didn't really cover greenwashing in full in this presentation, I just think in general, it's really hard to move forward with this issue, like you were saying, without people being well educated on it. So I think most generally my answer would be education for that. And then it would kind of end up, I guess, spreading into other kind of subtopics like understanding how to buy ethically, like ethically sourced products. And because that all falls under the umbrella of sustainability, right? So I think, like I said, general answer would be education, and then you would further delve into like what is sustainability, what is buying ethically, what is greenwashing, how do I know these products are green, etc.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lillian. We will need to move on to our next presenter, Emma. I think you're muted, Emma.
My bad. Okay. I'll go ahead and share my screen then.
Thank you.
Can everyone see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. So hi, my name is Emma Nakaoka, and this summer at Polygence, I explored gender inequality through journalism with my mentor, Ima. I created an online magazine called Not Your Mother's Feminist Journal, dedicated to voicing the opinions of Gen Z related to feminism, sexism, and femininity. I really wanted to create a platform where students like me could voice their views through journalism. I wrote 2 opinion articles over the summer, one about abortion rights and the second about the male gaze in the media. Based on the research I conducted and by incorporating my own opinion, I argued that 1, denying access to abortion is the denial of a human right, and 2, that the male gaze in the media shapes the perceptions and subconscious biases of society about women. So here's a look at what my website looks like. I have a homepage with featured stories, an about page with our mission and a bit about me, a contact page for anyone who wants to submit inquiries or wants to apply to join the staff, and pictured in the center there is the general format for each of my articles. So my first article was about abortion rights, inspired by the Dobbs v. Jackson decision taken this summer, which was responsible for overturning the court case Roe v. Wade and making abortion unprotected in the United States. So now states have the ultimate authority to decide whether or not to ban abortion in their territories. However, I discovered that the abortion procedure DNC can be critical to save a woman's life after miscarriage. And now this procedure is being banned as well, which could lead to potentially very deadly results for women in states with abortion bans and who don't have access to this kind of care. As we see in the top right, a nationwide abortion ban, which could now possibly be on the table, would correspond to around a 21% increase in deaths associated with pregnancy. Additionally, denying abortion may radically change a woman's life in other ways as well, such as forcing her to experience more possible financial difficulties, challenges with education, and also jobs. And clearly, this also affects the children born under these circumstances. So I believe that such a personal and potentially life-altering decision should be taken by the mother and the mother only. Okay, so my second article was about the male gaze in the media. The male gaze is not a very well-known term, but it refers to perspective in which women's purpose is to serve men. This is seen very prominently in the media, where women are often portrayed as sex objects or they are put in stereotypical subordinate roles. For example, movies often enforce unrealistic beauty standards or the notion that women need a man. Media has the potential to shape our biases and thus contributes very heavily to sexism, especially since we are exposing such young children to large amounts of media at a very young age, which really is a critical period for the formation of bias, which could stay with an individual throughout adulthood. So I believe that the first step must be to make the media more equitable so that we can raise the next generation of children without bias. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions for Emma?
I love your project and your website, and I love that you've spoken about abortion rights and the male gaze. And I've often found that even within the Gen Z community, you can see a bit of bias, right? So I'm wondering how when you've had like submissions or your audience, how that demographic looked like, how your target audience was, and yeah, I'd like to know about your target audience as well.
Yeah, so I think in general, I really want to target Gen Z, since those are the people that I want to be writing these articles and sharing them with the world. I think it's also very important really for everyone to read these sort of things, whether you're a woman, a man, or non-binary, anything in between, because it really does affect every aspect of society. And I think it's very important to have these views out there so that we can spur change.
We also have a question in the chat that says, how should the media change to be more equitable?
So that is a very loaded question, but it's a very good one. Thank you for asking. I think the media should be held accountable, and it's very important to get more female representation in the media and more accurate female representation in the media, since oftentimes many films seem to be very one-sided. I think it's very important also for more women to be in the film industry so that we can accurately portray relationships, just every aspect of society without having this inherent bias that women should be there for men with whatever.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Emma. We are going to move on to Karintha.
Okay, let me get my PowerPoint up.
Awesome. And I am going to spotlight you.
Okay. Do you see this all right?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. So what do you see when you think of a farm? Maybe something like a red barn with a rooster standing on the fence as the sun rises, or acres and acres of vegetables. While this may be the typical farm depicted in a children's storybook, depending on their location and stated purpose, farms can look very different, and not all farms exist solely to grow food or keep animals for meat. My research project aims to understand various roles, missions, and impacts that farms have worldwide. And I wanted to understand the following questions and answer them. So besides growing food, what other roles do farms play in different locations around the world? And specifically, how do these extra provisional roles differ between farms in the UK, where I currently study, and in Hong Kong, where I grew up? To answer these questions, I analyzed academic literature on the subject and conducted interviews with real farmers in Hong Kong and the UK. My research methodology involved visiting 2 farms in Hong Kong, One Leaf Farm and Gift from Land, and 2 farms in the UK, Churchill Farm and Whitcourt, to interview 4 farmers in total. I asked them questions concerning what they wanted to achieve through their farm, what they thought about the future of farming in the modern technological age, and what they thought about the current number of local farms as the food supply becomes increasingly global instead of local. From these questions, I found a wide range of opinions and fascinating thoughts from the farmers themselves about the importance of farms as a way to reconnect with nature and preserve culture. While both farmers from Hong Kong agreed that there was a lack of farms, the farmers from the UK explained that there was only a lack of traditional farms instead of a complete lack of farms in general. All farmers agreed on how the current Russia-Ukraine conflict has highlighted the need for farms in both countries, since the over-reliance of global imports in today's age means that food can become scarce and more expensive and subject to the fluctuations in the global political system. These situations highlight the importance of local farms as a means of remaining self-sufficient. I also learned that UK farms focus more on food production and educating the public about the origins of food, while the farms in Hong Kong focus almost entirely on education related to the coexisting with the natural world and how we can give back to the earth for what it has given us. The most important of my findings show that farms all over the world play a role much larger than merely producing food. For example, they can halt urban encroachment and control urban sprawl, produce jobs for the surrounding community, are a means of emphasizing the local over the global, are a means of preserving cultural traditions like autumnal festivals, rodeos, and agricultural knowledge, are a means of increasing biodiversity, are a means of educating the public about where our foods come from, and are an example of the kind of symbiotic relationship that we ought to have with the land that can also halt climate change. In closing, farms are located at the intersection between the past and our future, as well as the intersection between the city and nature. Going forward, we also ask ourselves, when we modernize our farms, how can we ensure that they remain preservers of our culture and the agricultural knowledge of our past? How can we enhance our farming methods to increase crop yields, but also make sure that these methods don't damage the natural environment? Lastly, I encourage you all to start thinking carefully about the relationship between your food and where it comes from. In doing this, we can preserve our most important connection with nature and start to understand the importance of local farms, not only as a source of food, but as a place where we can reconnect with nature, preserve culture, and balance productivity with environmental concerns. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any questions? I was curious if you, like with your peers at school, if you've noticed like whether they have like, I guess, kind of any interest in like seeing where their food comes from or going to farms, especially like if you're in city areas, and how you think we could encourage that in school systems?
So actually I did this kind of like experience day last year with my friends where we went to the farm like one of the farms in Hong Kong to just kind of see how it's like to harvest rice, and also the kind of process that farmers go through to kind of produce food. I think at the end of the day, it's not really like about kind of like, oh, like completely understanding, oh, like, so this is what happens to food here and this is what happens next, but kind of just like forming that connection with nature, and kind of like finding interest in nature to kind of like work on that, and kind of like see the beauty in it and appreciate it, so that we can kind of like figure out more solutions to like the world's most concerning like environmental problems. If that answers your question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it's cool to have like a discovery or experience day too for students, like you said. Any other questions? Okay, well, we will move on. We have two more students. One of them is not yet here. Oh wait, we just got one more question, sorry. What are your thoughts on urban farming in cities and how that affects our environment?
I think definitely urban farming in cities, like not only does it kind of raise awareness for kind of like what happens in farms to like people who may have never even been in the countryside or seen a farm in real life, but also kind of like overall makes the city a bit greener, I guess. I didn't really do a lot of research on urban farming, so I'm not too sure, sorry.
Okay, great, thank you. So I will remove the spotlight. And then Thenthamizh, I think you are next.
Yeah, I hope you're able to view my screen.
Yes, we are.
Okay. This image, above all, makes us question one thing. Why the disparity? A developed state is generally defined as one where a majority of the population is able to focus on things beyond their immediate needs. When a country is no longer focused on subsistence, that is, preserving and ensuring basic needs of the population at present, and the global south states are yet to secure subsistent levels of economy. And thus, questioning the disparity led me down a rabbit hole of discovering development theories, out of which two are the most prominent: modernization theory and dependency theory. Modernization theory classifies development as a linear process where nations progress from subsistent agriculture to trade to expanding industry to mass consumption. Dependency theory points out the factor that enabled such exponential development for the global north, that is, exploitation of global south states. This simultaneously ensures the global south states are stuck in the developing stages of an economy. That's where neocolonialism and my research paper comes in. On the slide is my research question. To what extent do the shifting power dynamics, geopolitical rivalry, and trade balances reflect trends of neocolonialism in South Asia, and how does it affect development? So what is neocolonialism? States in Asia, Africa, and South America have long been subject to exploitation and manipulation by states in the northern part of the Brand Line. Contrary to what one might think this suggests, this is a practice continued even post-independence for those countries that were colonies. This is what neocolonialism refers to and encompasses the external influencing of a state's foreign economic and political policy. It's where the global north exploits the global south's resources in a manner that only benefits the global north states that I've called the influencer states. Why South Asia? I noticed from my initial reading that a lot of the studies on neocolonialism are either outdated, concentrated in African states, or specific countries with little focus on South Asia as a whole. And South Asia is an important region where you have a lot of geopolitically strategic locations and resources that is often overlooked. And it also has a growing population that is also being exploited. And we will see that in a bit. My approach and purpose. My research paper digs deep into 3 ways in which the phenomenon neocolonialism manifests: shifting power dynamics and socioeconomic vulnerabilities, geopolitical rivalry, and trade ties. This can be seen in the USA's extensive military presence through South Asia and the globe, through Pakistan and the exploitation of overworked fast fashion workers, who we, as this image represents, are mostly women. My research attempts to highlight this by bridging the gap between limited literature and news reports of neocolonialistic practices. It makes use of research statistics that are based on balance of payments and other economic tools. Thank you, and I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Do folks have any questions? And feel free to post in the Q&A. Okay, we have one. What are the main differences between neocolonialism in South Asia and Africa?
All right, so generally African states are do not have as many financial resources, financial growth to be more specific, as South Asia. And they have the characteristic of neocolonialism in Africa is more based on heavy loans and debts to states such as China and institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. And in South Asia, you have, as I've mentioned, more geopolitically strategic locations such as Sri Lanka, which gives you access to a lot of trade, and that access has been given to has leaked, I should say, to influence the states such as China and Japan, for example. And also South Asia is host to a very large populations, so that also makes it more of a target to influence the states, because it also has talented labor, unlike African states that have typically lower literacy rates. And that is it. I hope that answered your question. Any more?
Any other questions? I'm curious how, a similar question I asked another student, but how you feel like this, like what directions your research might take, or how this has sparked interest in projects that you might pursue in the future.
Okay, so the approach that I've taken with this project is through, as is mentioned in my research question, geopolitical rivalry is one where there are committees and summits such as AUKUS and agreements such as SOFA, where states, influential states such as the US have access to military bases in South Asia that allows them to influence the states in different ways. And there are also other research papers, previous literature on different states, and that helps me understand and recognize patterns of neocolonialism in South Asia. And what was your second part of the question?
Oh, I was just curious how this, like, if there's anything you're excited about researching based on this project, I guess, or any future directions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to dissecting how MNCs fall into this. We call them non-state actors, where corporations or bodies, international bodies such as the UN and the IMF influence politics internationally and globally. As I've mentioned earlier, fast fashion workers in Bangladesh are exploited by Western labels, and you've also got Nestle, for example, exploiting child labor. So that is an aspect that I'm really excited about researching further.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you. Do folks have any questions that they weren't able to ask just generally to any of the panelists, any of the scholars? Well, great. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, scholars. These were amazing presentations. I feel like I learned a lot. We did have one other student, but they haven't joined yet, so I don't know if they're gonna make it. But I'll stay on the symposium for a little bit longer, but thank you everyone and have a great rest of the symposium.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.